Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Live at the Waterhole. We are starting out at Oldonyo Lodge, part of Great Plains up at Kenya with Africans. Lovely camera there. And yesterday we've had multiple giraffe coming to have a drink, and it looks like we might be graced with the same views again today. But thank you very much for joining us on Live at the Waterhole. So my name is Ben Coley, and I will be your naturalist for the next 2 hours. And we will be visiting a whole variety of different cameras up here in Kenya. We have cameras in the Eastern Cape, the Western Cape, the Sabi Sands, Madikwe, over in Namibia, Zimbabwe. We've got our eagle-eyed camera operators in Johannesburg that'll be keeping an eye on all of these cameras, and we will see what nature has to offer us today. No, our giraffe decided not to have a drink. That's a shame. But this is live and interactive. As you can see, live TV never always goes according to plan. But I would be absolutely delighted to hear any and all of your questions. So please do send in any questions or comments with regard to what we're looking at, what we're talking about, or anything you've always wanted to know about nature, the natural world, and guiding. And hopefully I will be able to answer those for you. But a rather barren scene at the moment here at Oldonyo. It's a shame our giraffe didn't hang around, but there was lots of stuff happening here yesterday. Oh, there's another giraffe. We have a giraffe hiding in the shadows. A nice dark male by the looks of things, enjoying a little bit of shade under that beautiful umbrella thorn, very characteristic tree that we know very well from this camera at Oldonyo. See the giraffe happily ruminating there. It wasn't feeding, so like all ruminants, has that ability to regurgitate previously ingested food, rechew it, make it smaller and smaller, which makes it much easier for that complex four-chambered digestive system to extract all the nutrients and all the moisture from it, which makes giraffes very unwater dependent, although they will take the opportunity to drink when they can, and also accounts for the very, very small droppings that giraffes produce. Their dung very tiny compared to their body size, but that is testament to the efficacy of their digestive system. And there is very little waste product. Mercedes Bean, glad you could join us. Greetings to you as well, and indeed a very happy Wednesday. I do lose track of the days here. Out in the bush, the animals don't follow any rigid schedule, and over the years I seem to have adopted that. Weekends mean nothing. Any day ending in Y is another day in the bush. Johan, oh, you're hoping we get lots of birds today. So do I. So do I. It's always nice to get some good birds on camera. One of our other cameras up in Kenya is always rather productive with birds. We've had some beautiful sightings of firefinches and lots of other little things coming down, cordon bleu, waxbills coming down to drink over the last month or two. So we will hope for some nice bird sightings for you. And good afternoon to Joanne Mello as well, joining us. Classic views of a giraffe drifting across the savannah. So these should be the Maasai giraffe up here in Kenya, as opposed to the southern giraffe that we have down here in South Africa. Categorized normally by a slightly more sort of jaggedy, irregular, patchy appearance, and not quite as tall as the southern African species of giraffe. They are the tallest of the four recognized species, which are divided into subspecies, some of them. It's always very complicated. They keep changing the classification of giraffe, but these should be Maasai giraffe. I saw plenty of these when I was working in Tanzania, They were so prevalent, in fact, there that one day we went out, I think it was about a 5 hour drive, and we decided to try and count the number of individual Maasai giraffe we saw. And once we got over 100, we kind of got bored of that game. So those ones are not particularly threatened, but there are, of course, various species and subspecies of giraffe that are threatened, which we mentioned yesterday. So the four main species of giraffe are the southern giraffe that we have down here in the southern part of the country, which is divided into the Angolan and the South African giraffe. We then have the Maasai giraffe, which we are looking at now, the reticulated giraffe, and then the northern giraffe, which is also split into three subspecies. Two subspecies, the Nubian giraffe and the Kordofan giraffe. Those I have never seen, but Maasai and South African giraffe, absolutely. Oh, some lovely views of that giraffe as it made its way across the plains there. Shame it didn't come down for a drink. But we have at least got one bird for now. Looks like one of our dove species, an emerald spotted wood dove. And good afternoon, Catherine, as well, who has joined us. Well, that was a big shadow. Has something arrived? Ah, yes, there is most definitely a giraffe. Definitely wading out into the middle of the water. That's rather unusual from a giraffe perspective. Maybe he's decided he can get slightly closer, or possibly showing off to this female here. Or maybe he's enjoying his own. Oh, this is the first time that I have seen a giraffe at Old Donio actually go into the middle of the water to have a drink. They're normally quite happy on the shoreline, although whether we can call it a shoreline of such small pieces of water, I don't know. A little bit of artistic license. Whether he's just proving a point to this older female that he is the dominant male of this waterhole, I'm not sure, but rather unusual to see. Picasso, I see you're asking about white storks. I am yet to see a white stork in this area, but we never normally do see very many in the Hoedspruit area. I remember seeing a few in the Sabi Sands over the years, but of all the sort of more commonly seen stork species, we don't often get to see them. I've seen black and I've seen woolly-necked and obviously the marabous, but the white storks, I'm yet to spot one thus far this year. Whether that means or what the reasoning is for that, I am not so sure. Perhaps they have found better areas, but with the recent rains that we've had, we have been seeing all sorts of interesting things. I know there have been discussions of lesser moorhens seen down in Juma. We've had sightings of dwarf bitterns. Here where I am on the estate where I live, we've seen a greater painted snipe. So lots of interesting things turning up in response to the rain. But I will let you know if we do have any confirmed sightings of white storks. I don't know whether any have been seen at Juma, not that I've heard. But that doesn't mean to say that, of course, they are not around, but never in big numbers in my experience. PB and Jam, good morning to you as well. Glad to hear you're watching whilst waking up and enjoying enjoying a cup of what I hope is strong coffee. Not a bad way to start the day with some giraffe also having a drink. Let's see if this young male is going to go and investigate this female while she's in a rather difficult position. You see both of them licking their lips. There's amazing long prehensile tongues that they have, about 40 centimeters from tip to base. Not 40 centimeters so it sticks out, of course, but very, very important for their feeding habits, wrapping them around branches and stripping leaves off those branches, and a very dark color as well, just to help to protect the sun. Lots of melanin in there to stop it getting burnt by the UV rays, and also very little arterial blood supply there. So if they do get pricked by their favorite food, the acacia species with all of those rather nasty looking thorns, there's not a great amount of bleeding that takes place. And remember that the those acacias are rich in tannins, and tannin generally does stop the bleeding in your mouth. If you've ever been to the dentist, you might have been told that you just put a tea bag in your mouth after a tooth extraction or something like that, and it helps to stop any bleeding and also numbs some of the pain. So handy stuff. Tannins in small amounts, too much, can be unpleasant, and animals can die from an excess of tannin poisonings, particularly in the very young leaves. Lots and lots of tannin that they use to protect themselves, a form of chemical defense. It's always a highlight of any safari to watch a giraffe feeding and watch that tongue dart out, a bit like a snake, and sometimes even lasso branches and sort of hook them and pull them down towards the mouth. He is a beautiful giraffe, Catherine. Yes, giving us quite the pose. I agree. It's a bit excessive amount of tongue activity, chewing with his mouth open as well. So I assume chewing on some cud that he's regurgitated. Was also capable of producing huge amounts of saliva, as are most ruminants. That saliva helps to break down the food and just lubricates everything. It also does break down some of those tannins as well, just to make it easier on the stomach and the body as a whole. They say that a cow, and therefore I assume a buffalo, is capable of producing over 200 litres of saliva in a day, which is a monumental amount of dribble, but very important when you're ingesting all that food that needs to be processed and reprocessed. Particularly vigorous chewing today. Beautiful close-ups. You can see that very characteristic bump in the forehead, those calcium deposits, just all designed to make the skull heavier and a more effective weapon. You can see the bumps behind the ears there at the top of the neck, and also those sort of little bulbous patches above the eyes. These are all signs of a well-developed male giraffe. Those protrusions will get bigger with age, calcium being deposited there. The idea being, from a sexual selection perspective, that head will weigh more and be a more effective weapon during those necking confrontations where they smack each other with those ossicones. You can see the bald patches on the top. Again, calcium buildups to make it a more effective and stronger weapon. Harriet Hodgkin, you're saying it's a baking 35 degrees in Cape Town. That is quite warm for this time of year, I would think, in Cape Town. It's about the same here in the Lowveld, but we'll consider that a relatively mild day after the last few weeks, particularly this time of year. Probably helped that we had a relatively clear night last night, which was lovely. I even got to see the comet last night. Yeah, I'm glad we stuck around at Old Donyo for as long as we did. Saw some nice giraffe interaction there. But I think let's head all the way down to Maputo Land to Tembe Elephant Park and catch up with our resident group of bull elephants. Beautiful, quite happy in that mud wallow where we saw most of them yesterday, making use of the spa facilities. And nice to see a herd of impala enjoying that nice short flush of grass as well. You're getting a really good view of that network of veins we often talk about on the backs of the ears. You can see them sticking through that almost paper-thin skin in comparison to the rest of the body. Flapping the ears to cool down, spraying the mud, spraying the water up behind the ears, just like a car radiator. And very, very effective. Reduce the body temperature by a few degrees just by doing that. Beautiful views of these sleek impala in comparison to the great bulk of the elephant. Catherine, I see you've asked how many stomach channels does an elephant have? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by stomach channels, but in terms of, we take the impala, which is a ruminant, which has the four-chambered stomach, with the rumen, the reticulum, the omarsum, and the abomarsum, where the fermentation of that food happens in the foregut. An elephant is what we call a hindgut fermenter. So it has a monogastric stomach. It only has the one stomach container, if you want to call it that. And just after the stomach, it has an enlarged cecum, and that's where a lot of the bacterial fermentation takes place before it moves off into the large and the small intestine, which can be tens of meters in length. I can't remember exactly how long they are, but it's quite an impressive thing. Oh, brilliant, look at that huge shower of dust. But between the heart and the lungs and the digestive system, there's an awful lot of stuff going on inside that great bulk of the elephant, all housed between that massive rib cage. If you take an elephant's heart, for example, an elephant's heart is massive. It weighs around about 30 kilograms. It can be up to 50 centimeters in length. If you compare that to ours, that's quite a big difference. Blood pressure, though, is very similar to ours. We're 120 over 80 on average. An elephant more like about 150 over 100. And so enormous lungs to enable them to carry that great bulk over long migrations. General lung capacity for us around about 6 liters, but big elephant bull like this could be close to 300 liters. So everything's similar to us, but on a massive scale. A lovely pose from this boy, beautiful tusks as well. I wonder if we're going to see him digging around in the mud with those tusks just to create a little bit more slosh. I did just check with regards to the elephant's intestines, on average between 19 to 22 meters long. So that's including both large and small intestine. But imagine that, having nearly 20 meters or 20 meters plus of intestines in your stomach, and incredibly big as well, in terms of girth and width. Good afternoon to you, Spuss, as well. You're very welcome for the giraffe at the beginning of the show. I can't take too much credit for that, but it's always lovely to start off the show with some drinking giraffe, even if they did make us wait a little while. But that's quite normal for giraffes. Johan, oh, you say you can hear a gorgeous bushwright calling. Well, I hope you are correct. It seems, don't have any audio, unfortunately, coming through from Tembe. I did hear the hardy-dar just now, but I can't hear any of the fainter calls in the background, which is a shame. But it is a very distinctive noise, that gorgeous bushwright. Sort of goes. It's a lovely noise, generally in much thicker vegetation, more often heard than seen, that's for sure. But one of the prettiest birds that we have out here. A lot of the bushwracks, very, very beautiful. Orange-breasted, we see quite regularly, grey-headed as well. But the gorgeous is often at the top of many people's lists to tick off in terms of sight. Very difficult to track down because they do like that thicker vegetation. If anybody is interested in learning more about the anatomy of these animals and others, I can highly recommend whether you can find it online, but there was a TV series in England on Channel 4 that was called Inside Nature's Giants quite a few years ago now, but they performed autopsies on a whole variety of animals. There were multiple seasons and dissected them and looked at their digestion and their vocal folds and their heart and how everything worked within them. It was absolutely fascinating. They did an Asian elephant, they did a lion and a tiger simultaneously to look at the differences. They did a hippo, a baboon, a giraffe in terms of African animals, a python they did, and a whole host of other animals as well. I remember they did a great white shark, a giant squid, a racehorse, a cassowary bird, a camel, I think a polar bear. And these were all animals that had died in captivity, and they were basically trying to figure out how they had died and took the opportunity with medical students or veterinary students in order to try and understand more about the anatomy. It was absolutely fascinating. Sparse in terms of how much food an elephant can eat in a day, or on average, an elephant will eat about 5% its own body weight. So you're looking at around about as much as 300 kilograms of food in a 24-hour period for a big male. Obviously, that's going to be dependent on the size of the animal and the quality of the food that they are eating. So in the dry winter months when things are less nutritious, they will need to eat more than they would do at this time of year. And they're called hindgut fermenters because of that enlarged cecum. So they have that one stomach. The food goes in there, is partially processed, then it passes into the cecum, which is the fermentation chamber, which happens after the main part of the stomach, and from there it'll move into the intestines for absorption. And in terms of what other animals are hindgut fermenters, zebra is a hindgut fermenter. So are rhinos, so are warthogs, a standard horse as well. Typical examples, and you can see that by looking actually at the dung that they produce. It's less well processed than those of ruminants because of the four chambers and the excessive processing that goes on of that food. So a hindgut fermenter's dung, if you pick it up and open it, you'll find far less digested material, much bigger pieces that have passed through the animal without being properly processed. If you look at giraffe dung or impala or kudu or any of those ruminant species, it's basically just powder. There's very little else in there, but much more fibrous, the hindgut fermented dung. Found it very nice to just be able to watch all of these little diminutive impalas quite happily wandering around in between these elephants, very tolerant of them. Generally, these old bulls are pretty placid, but I would not be comfortable walking straight through a group of elephants like this. And I think most trails guides would agree with me. Not generally a recommended course of action, but it just goes to show that there is this amazing sort of trust within the bush between most of the herbivore animals. Obviously, if a lion walked through, things would be slightly more different, but much more tolerant of them. With us, of course, we have persecuted and hunted animals and caused them problems for millennia, and their reaction to us is very, very different. But I think it's rather nice to see some of the smaller members and the largest member quite happily feeding. Of course, around a small waterhole, things can get a little bit testy, particularly amongst the young bulls. They can get a little bit protective. But in a situation like this, everybody seems to be getting along, which is lovely to see, and something we should all strive to reproduce, I sense. Just going back to the digestion, of course, it's worth mentioning that what we've been talking about, the hindgut fermenters and the ruminants, are pretty much just for the herbivorous animals. When you're eating vegetation, you have to deal with things like cellulose and lignin, which are the building blocks of plant matter, basically, and that's not easy to digest. So that's why these stomachs have had to evolve extra help with the use of the good bacteria. We also have it in our stomachs as well, being omnivores. And if you take something like a lion, it doesn't have that enlarged cecum. It's certainly not a ruminant. It has a very simple stomach by comparison, shorter intestines, because it is eating a very much protein-rich diet, and protein is far easier to absorb and to extract energy from than it is to get it from leaves and grass and bark and other wooded material. So amazing to see how evolution has sculpted these animals and their internal not organisms, organs, in order to make best use of the resources that are available to them. A little hint of frustration from this big bull. I'm not sure who that was aimed at, whether there was another bull considering coming down to use this mud wallow, perhaps? No? No, just had a bad moment. But something's bothering him. You can see obviously that head flap, and you can see the way he's just suspending his front leg there and letting it hang. I normally see that as a slightly frustrated elephant, or one that's debating what it's going to do next. It's unhappy about something. Maybe he was just having some indecision and was frustrated at his own indecision, who knows? Or possibly there was a message being passed on. Maybe there's another bull entering the area that he's not too keen on. Always interesting to try and figure out those little subtle body language movements of these big animals. Okay, but let's head up to the other side of the country. We're going to go all the way up to the northwest to Madikwe and to Tau Lodge. I'm a lovely little, as they officially termed, or unofficially officially termed, an implausibility of wildebeest. It's apparently the collective noun for wildebeest. I did see a little one that just went out of shot on the right. I'm surprised we haven't seen more calves. Very much wildebeest calving season. Actually mentioned part of that. I did a stargazing evening last night because we had a rare clear night last night. And we were discussing some of the stars up there and the associations in African folklore. I see another little one there hidden in the grass. And Spica, which is the brightest star in Virgo, is known as the wildebeest star because it's heliacal rising when it rises in conjunction with the sunrise, um, denoted the start of the wildebeest calving season. So more examples of astronomical things being named after resource availability. But lovely to see those little ones in that more orange coat, which will go brown after, or more of a blackish colour, around about sort of 8 months to a year's age. These young wildebeests, some of the most precocial animals, if not the most precocial animals that we find out here in the bush, capable of standing after only a couple of minutes and walking with the rest of the herd within 5 minutes, probably. But all part of that sort of the classic um, behavior of wildebeest, which are migratory animals as a rule, although because of fences and urbanization, most wildebeest, particularly in southern Africa, have now come much more sedentary. They are unable to migrate over big distances. Those traditional migration routes have been cut off. And because of that, they are very heavily predated upon by things like lions, one of their favorite foods. And they generally hang out in similar areas, so the lions know where to find the wildebeest, particularly during harsher conditions due to their rather picky diet of uh, only wanting short grass, short new shoots, not old fibrous grass. They leave that to the bulk grazers like the zebra and the buffalo. There are actually quite a few youngsters scattered around among this herd or these herds. Wonderful to see. Next generation, and aren't they so cute? We wish you long, prosperous lives up there on the plains of Madikwe. Danny French, I did not see what you're referring to earlier, a male Inyala with a rather badly wounded mouth and tongue being exposed. I did not see that. That's pretty horrific. I assume that it managed to escape from a predator attack. If it can still eat, it might have a chance, but probably not if the mouth has been damaged, unfortunately, which is a real shame. We always are amazed by nature's power of recovery. But if it was a serious trauma like that to the mouth, it's so important to get enough fuel into these bodies that may spell curtains, unfortunately, for that animal. I shall have to go back and see if I can see some pictures of it. But yeah, I would imagine possibly from a lion or a leopard attack, I would assume. But that is a real shame. But it does happen, unfortunately. That is nature. But it's a very difficult thing to watch when you see an animal with a severe injury like that. I would say things like impalas. If you see an impala with a broken leg, it's horrible. It just sort of flaps around and waves around, and there's absolutely nothing that you can do for that animal. Even if we did intervene, which we are unlikely to do so for an impala, unfortunately. But even then, you would have no way to set that bone to the point that it would ever be able to use it properly. But as we say, that is it is going to be food for something, and whilst it's sometimes quite difficult to watch, that is the nature of the wild. The predators also have to eat, and their bread and butter, if you will, is the old, the young, the sick, the weak, the injured. And if we fixed all the animals, and if all the animals were in perfect health throughout the year, the predator population would suffer greatly. So it's a cliche, but it is the circle of life. It's thus I'm happy, as you are, that the wildebeest up at Tau have something to eat. This whole area a few months ago was just a sort of a rocky desert land, to be honest. So they are very, very grateful. It amazes me that they can find anything to eat during the dry season in areas like this at all. So they must make use of it whilst they can. PB and jam, that's a good question. You're asking what is the favorite dung for the dung beetle? Well, you have to remember that there is not just one type of dung beetle. Just in South Africa alone, there are over 200 species of recorded dung beetle, and others are still being discovered even in today's age. So there are multiple different species, and just like everything in nature, those species all have their specific niches because if everything did the same thing, we wouldn't be able to house the same number of those animals. So it very much is dependent upon the species. You get some that will prefer herbivore dung, some that will prefer specific types of herbivore dung based on their diet and the moisture content. So you'll get specific dung beetles that you'll find with elephant dung and with rhino dung, and others that will use both. Others will prefer the smaller pellets produced by ruminant animals as opposed to the hindgut fermenters. And then you also do get some that will actually utilize predator scat, dog and cat scat. The spider dung beetles, well known for utilizing the predator dung, or I should say scat being the proper word. Scat is for predator, feces for an omnivore, and dung for a herbivore to give the correct classification of names of dung. So, a good question, but there are multitudes of different species, and they will all have slightly different preferences, be it to a specific individual species or a type of animal based on the consistency or the type of dung that they produce. But all of them hugely important for the ecosystem, particularly during the summer months. Recycling those nutrients, many of them bury the dung deep into the soil, which does a great job in terms of increasing the nutrient content in that soil for plant life to grow there the next season. So it is that whole, what we call the decomposers, are such an important part of the ecosystem to take that no longer being used matter and returning it to the ecosystem to be reprocessed and reused in the future. It's the conservation of energy, basically. So dung beetles hugely important, along with many of the other decomposing species like mushrooms and millipedes to some extent, and lots of microscopic organisms which are hugely important for that factor. But like with everything else, there are specific relationships within there. A very famous example, which we've spoken about before, is the use of the mites that live on some species of dung beetles. Those mites are important because they feed on bacteria which could potentially otherwise infect the dung beetle from the dung that they're feeding on. They also feed on the dung that builds up within the joints of dung beetles so that they don't get sort of snarled up and their legs get stuck and their wing casings get stuck and they're unable to move around. So lots of little intricate symbiotic relationships, even on a tiny level of something like a dung beetle. But they are a delight. We always look forward to seeing dung beetles, the way they can roll those balls, the strength that they exhibit, the way that they navigate, their thoroughly interesting breeding behaviors, producing the brood balls and the nuptial balls for what we call the telecoprid dung beetles, the most famous ones that actually create the ball and roll it away from the original dung pile. Great way of reducing competition from all the other dung beetles there. I mean, it's possible in a pile of elephant dung to find hundreds and hundreds of individual beetles making use of that digested or partially digested material. Remember, with elephants, very poor digestive system, only absorbing around 40 to 45% of what they eat. So plenty of usable organic matter that's passing out the other end. But these two wildebeests in the foreground look very comfortable, enjoying this nice soft bedding. Oh, well, they did. Murphy's Law, as soon as you say something about nature that goes against what you've said, happens all the time. That's why we try never to use finites in the guiding industry. We never try not to use words like never or always. We always hedge our bets with usually, statistically, most of the time, hardly ever, always a safer bet. George dung beetles massively affected during a drought. I saw that whilst I was doing some work for Wild Earth only last month. We'd had some rain. The dung beetles came out in force. It was highly entertaining during that rainy period. Then we had another very dry period for a month or so, and I think well, they all just disappear. They bury themselves back into the ground, and they don't come out and play. And I think in the whole 2 weeks that I was at Juma, which would have been the sort of latter part of December, I left, I think 23rd December was my last day of that 2 week cycle. I did not see a single dung beetle during those 2 weeks because they came out in response to the rains. And then when everything dried up, they all disappeared underground again. Now we've had some rain. We are seeing dung beetles again. So if we have a particularly bad period of drought, then yes, we will have a lack of dung beetles. But I am very happy for these animals. Having spent some time up in Medico as well, it can be very, very harsh up there in the winter. How anything survives, I don't know, because there's just huge tracts of completely grassless land, hardly any leaves on the trees because there are so few deciduous trees there. When I was up there, we had regular sightings of zebras and elephants and other animals practicing what we call geophagia, which is eating of the soil to try and replenish some of those nutrients. Um, but they seem to manage it every year. It's not unusual, but amazing powers of survival. Speaking of phasias, of course, what the dung beetles are doing is coprophagia, which is eating of dung. And we see that also in things like zebras. In fact, any of those hindgut fermenter animals that we have been talking about, because they rely so heavily on bacteria within the stomach, they are not born with a sufficient amount of bacteria to break down that cellulose we mentioned earlier. There is some bacteria, but not enough. So the first solid food that they will eat, usually after a couple of months after they've had a sufficient amount of milk, where they will be getting some of that good bacteria, they will start eating mum's dung because that has a lot of bacteria in it as she defecates. A lot of those enzymes and those bacteria that are in her stomach are deposited as well. And the calf or the foal will eat that and start to be able to allow that bacteria to reproduce in their own stomach and enable them to then digest things more effectively. So coprophagia, surprisingly common. Other examples, classic examples, that of the leopard tortoise eating hyena scat, very, very white in color. Oh, look at that tiny little one having a stretch. That's very new. But highly rich in calcium, which the leopard utilizes for its shell. But coprophagia is generally eating somebody else's dung. In rabbits and hares, we see something slightly different, which is known as refection, which is the habit of eating your own dung. So they also struggling to get enough food from the vegetation that they eat. So when a hare feeds during the nighttime, it will defecate what we call a cecal pellet, which is quite sort of blackish and slimy. And then more often than not, the rabbit will then eat its own dung and reprocess it before producing a fecal pellet, which are the ones that we find lying around, those very dry, crumbly little pellets. So that is the habit of actually eating one's own dung and digesting the food within it twice, which is not a nice thing to do and something I'm grateful that we don't have to. But that is known as refection. VivP, I honestly don't know how many species of flightless dung beetle there are, I'm afraid. Um, but your question of why would they evolve to be flightless is quite a good one, because you would think that flight would benefit them. Obviously, flight comes at an energy-related cost. Um, But why it would be beneficial to not fly, it's a very good question. Let me give that one some thought for a while. I can only assume that if you're, Shayla's mother doesn't seem too happy to share milk. I can only assume that if you're in an area where there is absolutely a solid guarantee that there will always be lots and lots of dung, perhaps it's not worth expending the energy to evolve wings or the requirements to have wings. But it would be strange for wings to regress. But I suppose if they're not using them and they're not required to use them eventually through evolution, they may just sort of slowly start to disappear and no longer be required. That's the only thing I can think of, that there must be a guaranteed amount of food. This female looks rather uncomfortable, but very enthusiastic suckling going on here from the youngster. It does look quite harsh when they sort of headbutt the mammary glands of the female like that, but it's all designed just to stimulate milk flow. Maybe there's a blockage in the milk bar today. But flight in dung beetles is very important. I mean, it doesn't take long that when an elephant defecates, within seconds the dung beetles start to arrive. They have those very sensitive feathery antennae, like we see on moths, for example, and they can pick up those scent molecules that are deposited into the air very, very quickly and from huge distances. And it's a bit like vultures; they just have this ability to just suddenly arrive and at the right conditions, there could be tens of them that are flying along, and they bump into you, they fly into you. I actually have a little scar on one of my eyebrows, which was caused by a dung beetle when I drove into one, or one flew into me whilst I was driving during a night drive in the summer many years ago. It actually drew blood and left a little scar in my eyebrow. So I have been branded by a dung beetle. But we've seen lots of nice arthropods over the last few days. Had a lovely sighting in the Timbavati over the weekend of a whole, I don't know what the collective term is, a flock of dragonflies that were all catching little midges or something, tiny little things that were flying around. You could see them catching them in those sort of basket legs. It's very, very good hunters. And a personal highlight for me is we saw a beautiful dice moth caterpillar, which is this rich sort of purple, white, and black striped caterpillar and has these weird sort of wavy spatula-like antennae sort of coming off the whole body. Some people suggest that it's a form of disruptive markings, just to help them blend in with the environment. But another interesting theory that I've heard for those weird protrusions is that they do kind of look like what happens after a caterpillar has been parasitized by a certain type of wasp, what we call the braconid wasps, well known for laying or stinging a caterpillar, paralyzing it, laying an egg, which, or in some species, one egg which will multiply into many eggs. And then those little wasp larvae rummage around in the body of this poor caterpillar, who is now mobile and doing its own thing again, being slowly eaten from the outside. And when it's time for those wasps to pupate, they erupt from the skin and create little cocoons, which you can see on the surface of the caterpillar. And they do look quite similar to those appendages that we see on the dice moth caterpillar. So one suggestion is that the dice moth has evolved those to just dupe any potential parasitic wasp into thinking that it has already been parasitized, and it may therefore be left alone. How clever is that? Mindy Tillipau, you're asking whether I think animals eating their own dung to extract extra nutrients is more or less efficient than rumination. I would say it's less efficient than rumination, certainly, but it's a good way to deal with a common problem. And you might ask why all animals aren't ruminants, but again, then we have that problem with a niche, that everything will be doing the same thing. So remember, if you are a ruminant animal, then your food is going to stay in your gut for a very long time. It has to be processed over a long period of time, which means you have to eat quite high quality food because it's going to be stuck in your body for a long period of time. And that's you'll find that with most ruminant animals, they are happy to survive on less amounts, but they need good quality produce because if they eat rubbish food, that rubbish food stays in the body for 2, 3 days perhaps, but there's no nutrient value to it. So it's a pointless exercise, and the body just can't get enough energy. Something like a zebra or an elephant or a rhino is a bulk grazer. It eats lots and lots of food. It's less well digested due to its only single stomach, but it doesn't matter because it's constantly topping it up. So I always say if there was a period whereby there was not much food, but it was higher quality food available, the ruminants would do well. And the hindgut fermenters would struggle because there just simply isn't enough um, biomass of vegetation. And if the opposite is true, if there was lots of food around but it was very low quality, your bulk grazing animals, your hindgut fermenters will do all right, but your ruminant species will struggle. So again, it's just another example of nature filling multiple ecological niches and allowing multiple species to proliferate within an ecosystem, and that makes the ecosystem stronger. Those species act like scaffolding. If you only have an ecosystem which is held up by 4 pillars, if two of those pillars disappear, the whole thing collapses. If you've got 25 pillars holding up an ecosystem, you could afford to lose 1 or 2 pillars, and not a great deal will change. Nice to see a male waterbuck entering the fray and some weavers doing their thing in the foreground as well. Oh, that looked like it might have been a Deirdre's cuckoo that just flew into the acacia above that nest, a brood parasite of the weavers. Difficult to see, but didn't look like it had the. Oh, it just flew off again. Wonder if that was a Deirdre's cuckoo hoping for an opportunity. Okay, that was a lovely visit up to Tau. And we're going to zoom back to the eastern side of the country, right down to the Eastern Cape, to Mantis Founders Lodge and see what's happening down there. Oh, a beautiful giraffe and possibly a sable in the foreground as well. Oh, no, definitely not a sable. Looks more like a blessbok. Possibly a bontebok. I always get confused by the two of those. I'm going to have to just double check. They are very, very similar. And after my little faux pas at Mabulla when I misidentified an antelope last month, I'm always a little bit dubious now. But Bontebok and Blessbok are not animals that I have spent very much time with. This giraffe also giving him a good look. I'd actually say, looking at the amount of white on the forehead there, I might be inclined to go with Bontebok. Some Egyptian geese sheltering from the wind by the look of it, having a bit of a rest on the water. And one standing guard. Otherwise, all rather quiet at the Eastern Cape. I think let's head back over to Tembe. I'm sure our elephants are still enjoying a bit of a mud bath. Let's go check it out. They are indeed making use of another one of those little seasonal mud wallows. Really scooping up, I wouldn't say handfuls, but I suppose trunkfuls of that dust. So always lovely from a photographic perspective to try and get that dust airborne. And there's one of the woolly-necked storks. Still no sign of a white stork, as I said. Woolly-necked with that characteristic white fluffy neck that you just saw disappearing behind the elephant. I'm sure he just sprayed himself in the eye. But so there's beautiful long eyelashes of an elephant, and same with the giraffe, just to protect those eyes from the dust and from feeding with one's head buried inside thorny trees. Very important to have those long, beautiful eyelashes. Very tattered ears this one has got. He looks a little bit sleepy, this one. I was always under the impression that those holes in ears were caused by being skewered by branches, but I recently discovered or was told that there are certain types of bacteria or bacterial which cause infections that if the elephant had even got so much as a scratch on the skin on the ear, if that certain type of bacteria, I don't know what it's called, gets in there, it can actually eat away at the skin and cause those holes to develop before they sort of heal themselves. So that was something new I learned recently, that those holes can be caused by bacterial and sometimes even fungal infections. This one I think is debating having a little bit of a snooze. He's definitely in a go slow. A very relaxing Wednesday afternoon. Theo, not really. It doesn't really matter if the soil dries onto their skin. That's kind of what they want it for. They go and have their mud bath, and then they spray the dry soil on them, and it creates this nice, crispy coating, this covering that just helps to protect them against sunburn and other external factors on the skin. And then they will often rub up against trees and stumps and rocks, to just have a good scratch but also just helps to dislodge any parasites that might also be attached to the skin. So I always describe it, it's very much like you might use an exfoliator in the shower, be it some form of shower gel or exfoliant product with little bits of grit in it, just helps to remove dead skin cells or anything else. If you had a problem with parasites and ticks, you'd probably be quite grateful for something like that as well. So I've never heard of it becoming a problem per se. They do it all the time, and I think if it was an issue, to be honest, they wouldn't do it so much. So it's part of their everyday life, and they have learnt to utilize it as kind of like a skincare product. Many of us go for mud packs after all. He's keeping a bit of a watch on these zebras. Elephants don't like things sneaking up behind them. They can't see directly behind them. They can hear very, very well. They will often just turn their head slightly like that, just to make sure there is no imminent danger. We often see that if there's an elephant close to the road and its bottom is facing towards the road, when you disappear behind it, it will often spin around or give you a bit of a head flap. It's kind of like the elephant's blind spot. Yes, their eyes are on the side of their heads, but with those big ears and great bulk, it does mean that they can't see directly behind them, and they do get a little uncomfortable with it. Shame this little stumpy tail from this zebra, probably lost in a fight. Don't see any other telltale problems from a predator. You'll often see the stripes not lining up perfectly due to some scarring if it was a lion attack. I think likely some form of intraspecific competition with another member of his own species, quite normal in male zebra particularly. And taking just the top layer of the water, doesn't want any of the muddy stuff down below, more oxygenated on the top of the water as well. It's massive water requirements. 120, 150, maybe even 200 liters of water required every day for a big adult elephant. That's very cool to see, just siphoning that top layer of water into the trunk. Oh, look at that lovely little bit of grooming going on in the background as well, mum and baby, reaching those parts which are very difficult to otherwise reach. What have you found there, elephant? A little stone. Or have you uprooted something? It was interesting yesterday up at Hyena Pan to watch the elephants digging something out from under the water and then feeding on them. I gave that a lot of thought yesterday, and I've come to the conclusion they were pulling so many of them out, and they were all very small, that I don't think they were tubers of any description. I'm pretty sure that they were probably fruits, maybe jackalberries or marulas or something similar, that had been carried down in the overland flow of the sheets of water after rain, and had possibly been buried in the water there. And such is the capacity of for sniffing out scents with such a big nose that they were probably the scent had permeated to the top of the water, and the elephants had identified this, and with their very sensitive feet were uprooting whatever these fruits were and taking advantage of them. If that Egyptian goose has got a nest down there, perhaps. But this is a very young one, a bit late in the season. Lovely to see a bit of interaction between mother and calf, or mother and lamb, we should say. This one giving himself a really good coating of mud on the back. Of course, that's the part that takes the biggest beating from the sun. Little folds on the top of his ears that match on both sides. It's rather nice. Ah, we've got an elephant having a swim. About time we had a pool party. Mindy Tillipau, again, very good question, and one that I'll have to research to give you a full-bodied answer. But you're asking, how does the digestive system switch from starting off with milk to then ruminating completely? If I remember rightly, in cows, when young cows, whether this is the same for all ruminants, I'm not 100% sure, but when they drink the milk, it bypasses the rumen and the reticulum and goes straight into I think the fourth of the stomachs, whereby the enzymes that they're born with can digest that dairy product and the proteins. And then I would imagine during those first few months, the rumen and the reticulum start to develop better. I wouldn't be surprised if there was something within the milk that helps to generate the required bacteria and the microorganisms that are needed for the rumen. At what age it starts in impala, I think it's only a couple of months, so it obviously happens quite quickly. But it's a very good question, and I don't know the complete ins and outs of it, but it's something I'll have a look at and see if I can find out and report back to you. But good question, Mindy. Thank you. I know it's a difficult concept, but I remember reading many years ago, and I didn't believe it, but I've researched in multiple sources, and they all seem to say approximately the same thing, that if one looks at the content of microorganisms within the rumen of a cow, for example, all of the bacterias in there, the individual individuals, if you will, of bacteria and flora and fungi and protozoa and everything else that's in there, just in one animal, there could be billions, if not trillions, of actual individual organisms within the rumen. So they must be born with some of those. And I imagine, being such small organisms, they will reproduce at quite a rapid rate. And there probably is something that the mother produces in her milk which enables that to happen. But yeah, I would think within a month or so it's eating solid food. But it's amazing to me to think that there are so many other things living inside an animal to allow it to exist and to be. It's an incredible feat. I'm actually just double checking, doing a quick search online. Of course, you never know what we should really 100% believe, but I've got one little thing here that says there can be billions to hundreds of billions of bacteria per milliliter of rumen fluid. So certainly gives some sort of backing to the fact that there could be trillions of organisms in one rumen. Ah, spoonbill, nice. Yeah, so this particular source says a single liter of rumen fluid can contain up to 10 to the power of 11 bacteria and similar numbers of protozoa and other microbes. So 10 to the power of 11, that's 10 with 11 zeros after it. Uh, well, that's, yeah, best part of, well, tens of trillions potentially. It's a ridiculous number. You're having a good groom. Oh, that'll be swordtail butterfly as well. The green swordtail? Can't quite see. Yeah, I think it's one of the green swordtails. Beautiful. Picasso. You're asking our impala babies we call lambs, and what about bushbuck? I would also call a bushbuck baby a lamb. But quite what denotes whether something is a lamb or a calf, in my head, it should be something to do with the weight, perhaps, but I don't know if that's the same. I'm just basing that on the fact that if we take Inyala, the classic example, that it is an Inyala ewe, but a Inyala bull as opposed to a ram. And Impalas, it's ewes and rams for males and females. But in Inyala, we have a ewe and then a bull, and that the difference there is the weight of a full-grown male. 100 kilograms is kind of the cutoff point. So above 100 kilograms, it's a bull. Under 100 kilograms, it's a ram. And the same for females between ewe and cow. So Inyala is sort of half and half. The female less than 100 and the male more than 100. But for lambs and calves, I'm not 100% sure. It may just be somebody's decided that those particular species, things related to sheep, but antelope aren't related to sheep. Good question. Again, I'll have to see if I can find out a little bit more, but my gut response would be something to do with the weight. Well, again, from a quick online check, it does seem to suggest it's not to do with weight and it's purely to do with um, cultural practices and linguistics. So again, I find that hard to believe, but as I say, don't trust everything you read online. But my gut still says it's something to do with weight. But I'll see if I can find out any more for you, Picasso. Lovely peaceful scenes here at Tembe, all being overlooked by this watchtower of a weeping bourbon tree. Wonder how many animals and interesting interactions that tree has seen over the years. Considered sacred in various cultures as well, and sometimes seen as a symbol of protection, can be planted near homes, bringing positive energy and warding off bad spirits. So maybe that's why all the elephants like to congregate around its base. Okay, well, let's head back up to Kenya and Oldonyo, and I think we might have some more elephants up there. Oh, beautiful big bull on the right, the size of his head, the girth across the forehead. Big adult bull. Both of them doing a little bit of back leg stretching, bit of elephant yoga this afternoon. Keeping everything supple. See a little bit of a twisting of the trunk there as well. We had a brief debate the other day about whether animals get cramp, and we pretty much established that they must do under certain, well, they do under certain circumstances, be it mineral deficiencies, dehydration, over exertion. But perhaps these little stretches just make sure to ensure that blood flow is sufficient to all those extremities. Huge amounts of pressure being placed on those great legs, but they are like four pillars perfectly positioned at the four corners of the body, which enables the elephant to sleep standing up. It can lock its legs and support all the weight evenly across those four limbs. And that great ridge of a spine supporting that massive rib cage, the keystone to that whole form. Incredibly heavy, dense bones in an elephant's leg to support all of that body weight. Minimal bone marrow, very, very solid, full of rigid calcium. If you've ever picked up an elephant bone, it is incredibly heavy. One sort of say femur or humerus can weigh, I would think, probably a good 20-25 kilograms. Unsurprising, considering that enormous amount of weight. I always think the muscles in the neck must be so well developed as well. Just the head of an elephant, the head and the tusks and the trunk, which of course, remember, is all muscle, and muscle is heavy, weighs the best part of 900 kilograms or so. So it's like carrying around a full grown male buffalo on your neck. Even with all the honeycomb structure of the main part of an elephant's skull, just to try and reduce that weight. The lower jaw, though, is much more solid, very, very heavy, and of course, the teeth, all four of them at any one time, enamel dentine, also very, very heavy. A sign of irritation. Maybe that one didn't want to leave, but decided he didn't want to leave his friends behind. Lovely caravan, a triumvirate of leviathans moving back into the bushes, and just disappear. Still blows my mind that a 6, 7 ton animal like this can just disappear into the ether. Ah, the giraffe taking the opportunity now that the waterhole has been vacated. Very confident approach to water from a giraffe. Normally take quite a long time to come down, checking, scanning, making sure it's safe. There we go. We better just have a quick check before we get too zealous. His giraffes are such teasers. This is often what happens. You saw the way that she confidently strode out, got to a few meters away from the water, and now we're having a very, very good check. We've waited hours sometimes for a giraffe to come down and drink. It's such a wonderful photographic opportunity and just an amazing thing to witness, but they don't have to make you wait for it sometimes. Making absolutely sure that there is no imminent danger. Brian, as I understand it, having never visited the area, I'm restricted to what I know from reading up about the area itself. But Oldonyo is in the Chulu Hills region, and up there they generally get two rainy seasons throughout the year. So you have the long range and the short rains. The long rains between March to May, which would be traditionally pretty dry down here in southern Africa. That's the main reasons, with the heaviest rainfall being between sort of April May time. And then at the moment, they'll be in what we call the short rain, so that's sort of October, November, December. I haven't seen much rain up there, but you can see by how green it is, there has been some rain, but you can also see some brown coming through in the grass. So perhaps coming to the end of those short rains now, and already the vegetation is beginning to respond and prepare itself for a prolonged drier period. Next few months up until around March, April again. Come on, giraffe. She seems to have backed off now. She got so close, came out with such purpose. Oh, we better just check around this side as well. Check all the angles. I think we've only got about 5 minutes left, so I'm hoping that she will come down and have a drink before we have to close the show. Let's cross fingers. Everybody give some positive, safe vibes to the giraffe. But you can, of course, understand their reticence. A very vulnerable position to be drinking. Hard to flee quickly if one needs to. But of course, we don't know what's going on in the background, whether there's some scent in the air that could be a little bit off-putting. I'm not exactly sure how sensitive a giraffe's sense of smell is, but like all animals, it's far superior to ours. So if a lion did come through and drink during the evening, there might still be some residual scent on the ground somewhere. You never know. For all we know, there's a lioness lying in the bushes at the back. Oh, has she plucked up sufficient courage? Oh, a little teeter forward. Thinking about it. Come on, girl. Edging closer and closer. Come on, you've got about 2.5 minutes left. Got to see the thought process going on. No, I'll just check just a little bit more. I haven't checked this side of the waterhole yet. Let's maybe go and have a look. Fascinating to watch it all go through the brain, hey? Oh, and after all that, it looks as if she's changed her mind. See what I mean about giraffes being teasers? No, maybe not. We've got less than 2 minutes, girl. Come on. Had second thoughts. I was really hoping we would get her drinking just before the end of the show. Since we started with some giraffe and giraffe drinking, it would have been a nice full circle moment. I think we are going to fall at the last hurdle. I've just heard in my ear that we've got less than 60 seconds left. So, unfortunately, I think she is going to wait until she's off camera. Maybe she's a little bit shy. But regardless, I hope you've enjoyed today's show. We've seen some lovely things. Little baby wildebeest, I thoroughly enjoyed seeing. Always a treat to watch a giraffe drink at the beginning of the show, at least. Some lovely elephant activity, of course, down at Tenby Elephant Park. But do hang around, join the crew for the Sunset Safari this afternoon. And one of my colleagues will be with you for Live at the Waterhole as from tomorrow. But thanks very much for joining us. Thanks for your questions and comments. Have a wonderful day, and we will catch up with you soon.